Thank you, Eric. And thank you all for coming. Happy Darwin Day. Today, I'm going to talk about the role of sex in human evolution. And I assume having the word sex in the title is why you're all here. Before I start, I want to offer a disclaimer. If I'm going to say something that you might not want to hear because of your ethics or your religion or your morals or the way you were brought up, or if you're afraid I'm going to show you something you don't want to see, because I just might, you should probably leave right now. I don't know why I did that. Because I promise you, I will show you something or say something you probably don't want to hear. Okay, so a long time ago, we didn't look like we look today. We didn't behave like we behave today. We didn't have speech. We didn't have written communications. And somehow we got from there to here. So how did that all happen? That's what I want to try to explain, and in the context of why was sex the primary thing that drove us that way? Well, there's a couple of things that happen according to Darwin in terms of evolution. Things mutate, right? Your DNA might mutate, it might change. You might get a replication of a chromosome. You might have a chromosome drop out of your DNA. You might get an extra chromosome that does something strange, or maybe a chromosome mutates and does something different. And those things happen. But what's more common is that in any species, a particular member of the species has certain attributes, right? And we're all different. We're all very different individuals. Even if we have brothers and sisters, we're very different from them. So some of us are more attractive than others for various reasons. And those are the people that are going to be selected for reproduction, right? So sexual selection is very important for evolution over the long term. Excuse me. So if we look at Australopithecines, the people on your left, this is what people looked like 6 million years ago. Or no, sorry, was it 6? 3 million years ago. They weren't humans, they were hominids, and they had huge physical dimorphism. A male Australopithecine was as much as 50% bigger than a female. Today, a male is only 15% bigger than a female. So that dimorphism has shrunk a considerable amount. And what does that mean? What does that tell us? Well, sexual dimorphism actually tells us about behavior. For example, males are bigger. They're also more aggressive in species with high sexual dimorphism. These are called tournament species, by the way. So a gorilla is an example of that. They have more aggression than pair bonding species, which are species that are less physically dimorphous. Fewer males get to mate, right? A gorilla fights for the right to mate. And if he wins, the winning gorilla gets to mate all the females. Everybody else, all the other guys, they're losers. Where in a low sexual dimorphism species, all the males get to mate. If you win the battle, though, in a tournament species, all of the offspring are yours. Where in a pair bonding species, only 1 or 2 or 3 are yours. Females select for dominance in tournament species, where females select for parenting skills in pair bonding species. And this goes on and on. But what it boils down to is, if you look at sexual dimorphism, what you learn is who is more likely to cheat on the other. If you're in a pair bonding species, it's the female who's more likely to cheat. If you're in a tournament species, the male has all the rights. How high are the levels of aggression? Depends on dimorphism in a way. Does the female tend to have twins or a single offspring when giving birth? In tournament species, she only has 1. Why? Because she doesn't have any help. It's all on her. And she's very unlikely to walk away from that infant because the infant will die, right? What are the female selection criteria for a male? What are the differences in life expectancy? So we want to look at humans in this context, because if Australopithecines were that dimorphic, they were probably a tournament species. But today we have very low levels of dimorphism. So we're not a tournament species. That means our behavior has changed. How did that come about? In a dimorphic species, you see that males compete, females have no choice. There's high physical dimorphism. Any conflicts between any members of the species are resolved with force and threats. And you end up with a male with a harem. And that's a strategy for sexual selection. It's a sexual selection strategy. And these vary across all the species. So, for example, there are species where the males do the selection and females show the attributes that are selected for. So in the case of the African starling, because males do the selection, it's the females who have the bright colors and sing the pretty songs. Where you're more familiar with females doing the selection in birds in America, you look at a blue jay or a cardinal, it's the males that are the pretty birds. Another thing that might happen is even when males do the selection, there might be high physical dimorphism, in which case sex is going to be one to many, and you end up again with a male with a harem. Or you get many to many sexual relations, meaning many males mate with many females and vice versa. And then you end up with something called sperm competition. And this is very important. I'm going to talk about this more. In nature, though, the highest cost in reproduction lays on the female. How do I get this out of the way? Going to be in the way again. Then you shrink it? Oh, no, we can't do that. Well, I'll just deal with it. So in all species, the cost for reproduction is much higher for the females. Why? Because they have to produce an egg. Males only have to produce sperm, which is not an extremely costly thing to do. But in females producing an egg, that's a tough thing to do. She has to nurture the egg until it gets fertilized. She has to continue to nurture the egg after it's been fertilized and it's dividing and turning into a blastocyst and so on. And eventually, and it may take months, it may take years in the case of elephants, until she actually gives birth. And then after she gives birth, she has to nurture that infant in some way, be the species bird or elephant or seal. And then she has to raise and teach this creature until it's old enough and strong enough and smart enough and trained enough to leave. Right? So that's a big investment. So in most species, females do the selecting. Most of the time, females do the selecting because of that cost. And then males have to show selection attributes. And another thing males do that's very strange is they have lek behavior. And let me tell you what lek behavior is. If you look at the picture on your right, those creatures are sage grouse. And what happens with sage grouse and a lot of other species is the females form a ring and the males go into the middle of the ring, and they have the brilliant plumage because the females are doing the selecting, and they display their brilliant plumage, and then they dance in a circle. And the females watch them do this dance and they select the male that shows the most selectable of the attributes that they're looking for. That's correct. And this almost always results in monogamous pairing. So when females do the selection, you end up with monogamy as a rule. Then there's the possibility of mutual selection. Dragons. Sorry, too many buttons. Or you can get to one-to-one matings, and that results in monogamy in the case of marmosets here. And then finally, you can have a case where females compete, and then you got a high dimorphism again, but this time it's the females that are the big ones. And they take on the role of doing things like protecting the herd. And it's the males who raise the infants. But this is very rare. So if we want to look for indicators of selection strategy among a species, you look for things like, does the male show selection for specific attributes? Does the female show selection for specific attributes? Because that tells you who does the picking and choosing, right? Is there evidence of sperm competition? Because that tells you what their mating practices are like. And is there lek behavior? So let's look first at, do males select for attributes? Well, one sex always shows a preference for certain characteristics of the other. And this stands to reason. If I can look at a female and determine by looking at her whether she's healthy, whether she's capable of having offspring, maybe she shows some signs of being a good nurturing kind of a person and non-aggressive and things like that, she's going to be more attractive to me. I mate with her. Our offspring carry on my attraction for those characteristics and her having those characteristics. And the same for her. She looks at me and makes the same kinds of judgments. So our offspring also have my characteristics and her attraction to those characteristics. And if we're both right, that those are good things to have, then our offspring get to survive into the future. And we pass on that attraction and the attractiveness, right? If we're wrong about our selection criteria, we die out. So over time, we get better and better at this stuff. So what do males and females select for in humans? And in many other species too, in some cases. Symmetry is one. And why would that be? Well, if you take a look at this guy, he's a pretty good looking guy. What's his name? Anybody?
Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt. The one on the left is the actual Brad Pitt. And you notice he's not perfectly symmetrical. He's just a little bit off. But if you take the port side of his face and you flip it over, and he is perfectly symmetrical, he's actually better looking, right? Symmetry makes a difference. And there's a reason for that. Your ancestors got mutations. And maybe it wasn't a fatal mutation, maybe it wasn't a bad thing, but it's there, right? And it's a little bit of a tweak to your DNA. As generations go on, you're collecting more and more of these mutations and passing them on to your offspring. And that's called a mutation load. And when it gets to about 500 mutations in your mutation load, your symmetry starts to get screwed. Okay, so it's visible. So somebody can look at you and actually determine whether you have a high mutation load or a low mutation load. And that's something you want to know if you're selecting a mate. It's especially obvious to women when they're ovulating. So they're very careful about selecting for symmetry. We all select for secondary sexual characteristics. The reason there are sexual characteristics, secondary sexual characteristics, is because we select for them. And because we select for them and we're right in our selection, they get passed on. If we're wrong in our selection criteria, they don't. Males and females both look for selection markers, fertility markers. Here's a case of a female Galeta baboon, and she's got a display. And when she's ready to have sex and procreate, it turns bright red. So the color red is very important for these baboons because it says, okay, it's time to get it on, right? It's a big signal. And humans have fertility markers too, and I'll point some of them out in a little bit. One of the things that is a fertility marker, although it's not a visible thing, is our ability to detect pheromones. We do this subconsciously. We don't know we're doing it, but we're doing it. And it's also important because one of the things that pheromones tell you is histocompatibility. Do you get the same diseases I get? Do you get different diseases than what I get, right? And this might be important for our offspring later on. And males can detect through pheromones whether a female is an estrus or not. Another important thing to know, and that's a fertility marker. Popularity with the opposite sex is also very important, and it's kind of strange, but and I can tell you about an experiment that was done to prove it using some stuffed crows, but I'll tell you why it's important instead. Suppose you are a female in a group of females, say you're in high school, right? And there's a guy who's not very tall. He doesn't look strong. He looks kind of weak. He's a skinny guy, but all the girls are crazy about him. They're always hanging around with him, but you don't get it. What is it? Well, why are they crazy about him? I must be missing something. All right. And it's that I must be missing something that triggers you to go find out why they all like him. And you don't even really care. There's also a competition going on, right? So if they want him, you're going to want him too. Another thing we both look for, males and females, is parenting competence. And again, that would be important for the future viability of our offspring, right? Homogamy, this is an interesting one. If I look at a female and I see that she has characteristics that I'm attracted to, then the odds are very good that my parents had those characteristics, right? And if I'm attracted to them, there's a very high probability that one or both of my parents were also attracted to them. So she's like my parents. She looks at me, she sees the same thing. He's like my parents. He has all the attractors that my father had, and I have all the attractions to those factors that my mother had. So there's a mutual attraction. It's built into the DNA. And finally, somebody who is nice to you is more attractive than somebody who is not. And that's also kind of an obvious thing, right? Men are attracted to females that are younger than themselves. And there's an obvious reason for this too. If you're an old man like me and you have sex with an old woman, the probability of her conceiving is low. The probability of her coming to term with the infant is low. The probability of her surviving giving birth, thinking historically, is very low. The probability of the child surviving the birth is lower. The probability of the child being normal and healthy and having all their parts and everything is lower. And the probability of her being able to bring that child through the 15 years of growing to the age where it can leave is very, very low. So this is a bad bet. But if I'm an old man and I have sex with a young woman, all of that stuff gets reversed. All men look for healthy markers of fertility. And again, this is an obvious thing. If you do that, the likelihood of passing on your genes to future generations is much higher. Now, according to Dr. Midge Wilson, based on some studies she did, there are six criteria for selecting in the case of men, and they all relate to good health and fertility. Number one is a wide waist to hip ratio, because a bigger butt, a smaller waist, wider hips are indicators that she'll be able to bear children better, right? There won't be a restriction in the birth canal, greater success. So it kind of makes sense. The studies show that waist to hip ratio of 7 to 10 is what's most attractive. And that would be a 25-inch waist and a 36-inch butt. This is a picture of somebody with those measurements. And personally, I don't find her very attractive, but that's okay. An eye tracking study found that men start to evaluate a woman's hourglassness, to coin a word, within the first 200 milliseconds. So a guy meets a girl, and within a fifth of a second, he's looking to see if she's got the right measurements. Men like the hourglass figure, but while they focus on the body over the face when they're looking for sex, they focus on the face over the body when they're looking for a relationship. So my eyes are up here, guys. Studies report, though, that women focus on the face, no matter what they're looking for. They start there. Men look for a high-pitched voice. It's associated with youth. We know that's an attractor. And a small feminine body, according to research that was done. And also a woman's voice gets higher during ovulation. So that's a sign that she's ready. Okay, so that's something that men totally unconsciously become aware of. So they know when a female's ready for sex. Healthy hair is a sign of good health. So that's something men look for. A nice smile, especially if she's got good teeth. These are both signs of something you want. A natural look. Turns out that men prefer women who wear fewer cosmetics and less cosmetics, which is kind of surprising. And the color red. And that really is surprising, right? What's that got to do with anything? Well, it turns out that the color red back in our ancestral days, going back far enough, was an indicator of sexual readiness. You're ready to mate, your butt turns red. Okay, now we're not aware of that, and it probably doesn't happen so much today. I don't know for sure, but way back when our genes were being selected for, way back when, that was something that was built into us genetically, and it's something that we retained. The sex appeal of rounded female buttocks and plump breasts is both universal among humans. All humans, no matter what society you're in, are attracted to that, all males. And it's unique to humans as well. It's unique to humans. No other species, no other animals look for TNA. Permanent breasts are unique to humans. No other species, no other primate, no other mammal. There's 5,000 different kinds of mammals on Earth. None of them have permanent breasts except humans. Every other mammal develops temporary breasts during ovulation or nursing to produce milk for the young, and then they go away. Why do they have to go away? Because if you want to escape predators, you don't want to be dragging around stuff you don't need. Okay, so they go away. Otherwise, you're not going to survive. So every other species, that's the way it worked out, except for us. And that's something we want to look at later, right? We're going to look at breasts later. This is shown, here's an example of one of the earliest sculptures known to be done by humans. This is the Venus of Willendorf. And look, big round breasts, pretty good symmetry. I mean, it's hard when you're carving stone like this. And the big round butt with good symmetry. Somebody knew what they were doing here when they made this. We don't know what that was for, by the way. There's a lot of conjecture. Why did they carve that thing? But it's the symmetry of the breast that indicates the phenotypic quality, right? The low mutation load. Now, full breasts could be there for a different set of reasons. It could be that they signal a woman's ability to store fat. This would be very important 50,000 years ago, right? If a woman has the ability to store lots of fat, that means she can get through times of famine. If you have offspring, she won't die in the middle of trying to raise them and so on. So that would be a good thing to have. Another thing is they indicate whether she's ready to have offspring or not. Is she fertile? If she's flat-chested and prepubescent, she's not ready to have offspring, so she's of no interest. And if she's got, boobs down to her knees, she's probably past her prime, and she's probably also not a good bet. So does the male select for attributes? Yeah. Human males select for attributes. How about women? Women's choice of male characteristics is dependent on where they are in their cycle. So they flip back and forth depending on where they are. When ovulating, women select for genetics. When not ovulating, women select for resource benefits. Resource benefits being like, can he protect me? Can he feed me? Can he show me a good time, right? You look for that kind of a thing. Women look for someone who is older. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the protection and the ability to provide and so on. But they also look for economic prowess. Modern females look for extended phenotype indicators like, is he wearing a $3,000 gold watch? Is he driving a $110,000 sports car? Is he wearing a silk suit? He's attractive, if those things are all true. So if you're the kind of guy that goes out looking for a woman and he's wearing jeans with holes in them and a shirt that doesn't fit, you're not making yourself a good candidate. So put on the suit. Women look at the face first, but they also look at the torso. And the voice has a big impact. This is Casanova. Now you notice he's not a very good looking guy. He doesn't have perfect symmetry. He wasn't very tall. And yet it's believed, he conquered 1,000 women. And when he was asked, how do you do it? He said, I have a deep, melodic, sonorous voice. And that's what worked for him. Other things women look for: a jutting jaw, high forehead, high muscularity, and looking for those characteristics is even more pronounced during ovulation. Why? Why is that? Because they're indicators of testosterone. And testosterone is something that makes you or enables you to be very muscular and cut and all of that stuff. But testosterone compromises the immune system. So for you to have a lot of testosterone and survive having a lot of testosterone and thrive having a lot of producing all of this testosterone indicates that you are a very healthy person. So it's a sign of health, and is a really good sign of health. During peak levels of fertility, and this is a side note, but interesting, women prefer more masculine and socially dominant men. And in the literature, psychological literature, these men are known as cads. And they tend to be sexy, have narrow eyes, strong jaws, right? Good testosterone, but they also tend to be flashy and exploitive. They have something called the dark triad personality, which includes Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. And these guys are not a good bet, okay? They're a great one-night stand. During less fertile phases, women are drawn to more feminine and compassionate men. And these men are referred to as dads. They tend to be more reliable, warm, and faithful. And they also offer better prospects for a long-term relationship. Women seeking sperm donors for in vitro fertilization cared more about good genes and more mostly, and partner potential less than women who are seeking life partners. So when you're looking for a real person, you're not necessarily looking for the good genes, but if you're looking for a good sperm donor, that's what you look for. So when strictly contemplating a man's genetic contributions to the future child, these women tended to care more about the man's physical attractiveness than his character. So men select for women and women select for men. Okay, so that's mutual selection. Interesting thing about humans. Now, is there evidence of sperm competition? Because that also tells us something. So what sperm competition is all about is if a species has many-to-many sex, many males are mating with many females mating with many males, there has to be sperm competition. How do you pass on your genes? How do you guarantee you're going to pass on your genes when that stuff is going on, right? How do you win in that competition? Well, that sperm competition has to take place inside the female. So that makes it even a little more difficult. So here are various primates. I knew I was going to offend somebody. So here are various primates, and let's look at whether or not they show indicators of sperm competition. Well, the bonobo and the chimpanzee are very closely related. They're only separated by, at most, 2 million years. They both grew up in Africa, and about 2 million years ago, or 1 million years ago, a geological event happened, and they were separated by a river. So they then evolved independently for 1 or 2 million years. And the bonobos self-domesticated because there was something about where they wound up that encouraged that self-domestication. But the chimpanzees, that didn't happen. So anything that has to do with sperm competition has got nothing to do with the domestication syndrome. So they're both a lot alike. And if you look at the size of their testicles compared to the testicles of the other primates in this chart, you notice that they're a lot bigger. So the way a chimpanzee wins the sperm competition is to produce as much sperm as he can possibly produce, and whoever produces the most increases their odds of passing on their genes to a future generation. It's kind of a crapshoot, right? Same things with the bonobos. So those two primates definitely have a sign of sperm competition. It's the size of their testicles. Orangutans don't pair bond, and they're not tournament species, and they don't have a sperm competition going. Gorillas are tournament species, right? They fight for the right to mate. So who wins the sperm competition? The biggest guy. And he's not competing at the sperm level. He's competing at the physical level. And look at the size of his body compared to the other primates. They're huge. Now, what about Homo sapiens? You notice the testicles are not particularly large. So if the size of your testicles is the measure of whether or not you participate in sperm competition, then humans don't. But dimorphism in early hominids implies that something was going on, and it was probably not sperm competition. It was probably high dimorphism, meaning that the males fought for the right to mate. And it might also imply that later on, multiple males mated with multiple females. And we can look for the evidence, because if multiple males mated with multiple females, that implies sperm competition. Any sign of that would tell us whether that happened or not. Well, human testis size, as I said, is relatively small, which implies sperm competition is not a major issue, at least in modern humans. The human penis is extremely dull. It doesn't have lumps, ridges, flanges, kinks, or any other exciting features that other primates have. And in primates, this lack of penis complexity is usually found only in monogamous species. So that would imply that we're a monogamous species. But this observation clashes with the fact that men are today 15% larger than women, and 3 million years ago might have been as big as 50% larger than females. So this suggests our evolutionary background involved a significant degree, possibly of polygynous rather than exclusively monogamous mating. Male sexual ornaments and male genitals are the most useful traits for distinguishing most animal species from closely related members of the same genus. So evolutionary innovation seems focused on the details of penis shape. So we're going to have to look at that too, right? The more sperm a male produces, and this is the bonobos and the chimpanzees, the more sperm a male produces and or ejaculates inside a female, the greater the probability that one of his sperm will fertilize the ovum and pass on his genetics. But if you look at a human penis, we don't have the large gonads. So is there any indicator here that there is sperm competition among humans? And it turns out there is. It's this little ornament at the end here called the glands. For a long time, scientists looked at that and said, what is that thing for? Why is that there? Why is it shaped like that? And there was a lot of conjecture about it. And what we've come down to is it acts as a pump. And if you're in a polygynous society where many males are having sex with the same female, and say you're the third guy in line, right? Having this device on the end of your penis allows you to pull out the sperm that was deposited there before you arrived. You like that, huh? So another thing that we see is among humans, among primates, humans have the longest penis of any primate based on body size. So if you combine those two things, right? If you're the third guy that gets there and you've got that glans, you also want that glans to be as deep as possible to pull out as much sperm as possible. And you also want to deposit your sperm as deeply in as you can, and thereby guaranteeing that you're the one whose genes get passed on to the next generation. So over time, the penis is going to get longer and longer. If the male sperm in this strategy are implanted deeper and or the competitor's sperm can be extracted, the greater the probability that one of his sperm will fertilize the ovum. So there's evidence also of sperm competition in humans. Maybe not today, but going back in time, definitely. So what's the next question? Is there Lek behavior? Because this also tells us about selectivity and selection. Yes, there is. Somebody said Super Bowl. Absolutely. Men get dressed up. They put on uniforms. They go out there. They strut their stuff. Who runs fastest? Who's the biggest? Who's got the best symmetry? And they're doing it in front of people who are judging them. And there are women in the crowd looking at those men saying, wow. And what's that singer's name who's going out with the football player? I mean, she picked him partly because of his Lek behavior. You also see that in the arts. All the movie stars line up. They're wearing very expensive tuxedos. They've got very expensive haircuts, very expensive shoes. Some of them don't wear socks. That's a pity. They all have excellent facial and body symmetry. So, when they line up like that, the women in the audience are saying, ooh, Frankie. And here's a boy band too. And you look at them, they're doing the same thing. This is Lek behavior. Women do it too, though, in humans, which is, again, kind of surprising. In no other species does the female exhibit Lek behavior. So females select, males select, and there's Lek behavior. And we went through a phase, at least, of sperm competition. Kind of amazing. Now try to retain all that, because now we're going to talk about something completely different. And that's the orgasm. I like to say an orgasm is like a single malt scotch or a cheesecake. Even when it's not so good, it's still pretty good. Why do men experience an orgasm? Well, there's an obvious connection with physical ejaculation, right? Because that's a physical sensation. But orgasm and ejaculation are not the same thing. You can ejaculate without having an orgasm, and you can have an orgasm without ejaculating. So there must be other reasons why it's as massive as it is. Orgasm causes the release of hormones. Testosterone is released and it circulates back to the brain. Now, if you're a species with polygynous behavior, then you want to be able to have sex and then have sex again as soon as possible, and then have sex again as soon as possible. So the testosterone that circulates back to the brain enables you to do that. So that's why the testosterone is released. Also released are oxytocin, dopamine, and phenethylamine. And finally, the pleasure associated with sex promotes future sex because it really feels good and you want to get that feeling as often as you can possibly get it, right? Now, oxytocin, which is released, is the main hormone related to pair bonding. Okay, females produce oxytocin when they look at a baby. Why do women enjoy looking at babies? Why do they go ooh and ah? Because when they do it, they get oxytocin released. And when they nurse, a lot of oxytocin is released. And if you're looking at a baby and he's nursing and you look at their eyes, man, bonded forever. Very powerful thing. Oxytocin also makes humans more trusting and cooperative. So having sex helps you pair bond, and it makes you more trusting and cooperative with your mate. A male orgasm also increases the production of testosterone over time. So if you're virile and have lots of testosterone, having sex makes you more virile. Male orgasm also increases production of another hormone called vasopressin. And in men, this is critical for forming a pair bond. And in fact, it's the number of vasopressin receptors in the brain. When they're very high, that's typical only of monogamous species. And it stimulates also the production of dopamine. And dopamine is a drug that's produced in the body to help train the brain to do things. So when you do something that's good for you and good for your microbiome, you produce dopamine and it trains you to want to do that thing again. All right. So having an orgasm makes you want to have another one. And vasopressin receptors also determine monogamy versus polygamy. So humans, it turns out, have half the vasopressin receptors of a chimpanzee, but twice as much as a marmoset. So we're right in the middle. Now, why do women experience orgasm? Well, for one thing, when a female has an orgasm, it increases sperm motility, and that increases the probability of fertilization of the egg. So that's a good thing for procreation. Female orgasm also releases prolactin, and that promotes languorous behavior. So after she has sex, if she has an orgasm, she kind of wants to lay there and enjoy the moment, as opposed to getting up and running around and doing the dishes and so on. And that languorous behavior promotes, again, fertilization. And a female orgasm, obviously, it feels good. Let's do it again. And even for the female, it releases oxytocin, dopamine, phenethylamine with the same results. And it turns out that the female orgasm is heritable. So if you have an orgasm easily as a female, then your offspring will probably have orgasms easily as well. And if you have multiple orgasms all the time, then your offspring will probably do the same. And if you have massive orgasms that make you scream, oh God, then your offspring will probably do the same. So this is a trait that's going to be passed on and increased over time. Now, female primates, and we're going back in history again, can experience multiple orgasms, female primates. So it's been theorized that ancestral hominid females sought out males who would give them multiple orgasms through the mechanism of sexual selection. And bear in mind, these are hominids who are walking around naked. The females are looking for the males who have the equipment to give them that multiple orgasm. And over time, that's going to increase penis size and alter the structure if it does the job. Now, the larger human penis suggests that hominids, well, I don't agree with this first bullet, but the study says hominids needed to keep females with choice sexually satisfied. I think it's more on the female side to make that call. Ancestral females would have experienced the sexual freedom denied in Western cultures today. So if you go back to, primitive humans and late hominids, they're looking for sex. They're looking for a guy who's got the good equipment, and they would have the right to make that choice, right? So they would. And it's been suggested because of this combination of things that our ancestors went through a period where matriarchy and enhanced female choice was the name of the game. It wasn't a man's world. Now, about 50,000 years ago, we got language. We had a mutation in the brain that gave us the ability to speak. And actually, that gene that was mutated twice. Okay, so suddenly, 50,000 years ago, we could speak to each other. And that had a huge impact in a lot of ways. One of these ways is we could now cooperate and plan things. So consider the situation where 50,000 years ago, we're talking Homo sapiens now. They're in a tribe that's nomadic. There's about 50, maybe 75 humans in this tribe. And the women are smaller than the men, not by a great deal, but they're smaller. And they're kind of afraid of certain males. Okay, it's the males who are reactively aggressive that they're afraid of. Because if you tick one of these guys off, he's going to beat you with a club or maybe a rock, and maybe he'll kill you. Maybe he'll kill your children. Maybe he'll murder your brother. Okay, so everybody's afraid of these guys. The reactionary, aggressive people are something to be afraid of. So they get together as a tribe and they say, Joe killed 2 people last month. Andy beats his wife. What are we going to do about it? Well, I don't know. Ralph, why don't you and Fred hide out in the bushes, and when he comes by, hit him with a rock and try to chase him off. And if he won't leave, just kill him. So they do that. And this happens in every society on the planet. This has happened. And it's capital punishment. It's the invention of capital punishment. And it's the elimination of reactively aggressive males. Eliminating reactive aggression in a species leads directly to self-domestication. So how did the baboons self-domesticate? The females arranged to have all of the reactively aggressive males killed off. They self-domesticated. And the same thing happened in humans. And I gave a talk about this some time ago, if you remember. And the self-domestication peaked out at about 30,000 years ago. Well, one of the pieces of the self-domestication syndrome, the domestication syndrome, is that physical dimorphism decreases. So there was probably very high physical dimorphism that got smaller and smaller because of self-domestication. It also led to pair bonding. It led to monogamy replacing polygyny. And selection criteria became more abstract and complex because now we're talking about things. And that starts to feed into the selection criteria. When living in complex human societies, the largest and most important sexual organ is the brain. So now let's talk about monogamy. Did I skip a slide? Yeah. Social monogamy is the behavioral pairing of a single male with a single female. In case you didn't know, it's most common in birds, but rare in other animals, very rare in other animals. And in fact, monogamy, even where it exists, is almost always serial monogamy. So say you have ducks. Ducks are monogamous. A male duck mates with a female duck. She gets pregnant. She lays eggs. He sticks around. He helps take care of the kids. They get big enough where they can swim off on their own, and the pairing is ended. Then the female goes off, looks for another male, and the male goes off and looks for another female. And when they find each other, again, they have monogamy. Okay, that's serial monogamy. The only primates that mate for life are gibbons. And our last common ancestor with gibbons was 20 million years ago. So, this is probably not something we inherited from them. This is probably something they developed later. So early hominids, going way back, may have been a tournament species because of the size difference. That's a key indicator. Early hominids, though, at some point were definitely polygynous, right? We've got all the indicators for it. So now you have to ask the question, have we gotten to the point where we are a monogamous species? And if we are, just what kind are we? Theoretically, individuals in monogamous pairs will both contribute to the defense and parental care of offspring, and that increases the viability of current and future generations. So choosing an appropriate mate is a really good thing, but choosing an inappropriate mate could be a really bad thing for your DNA being passed on to future generations, right? Because the costs of poor mate choice in monogamous species can be so high, in some instances, organisms engage in strategies of either serial monogamy or extra pair copulations. Mating for life reduces the potential for genetic variation among a female's offspring, right? A female is going to produce an egg that is a combination of the genes of her parents, and the male is going to produce a sperm that's a combination of genes from his parents. And then they're going to combine, and you're going to have genes from both the female and her parents, and the male and his parents. But if the female can mate with more than one male, she can produce offspring which have more variety in their genetic makeup. And in that variety, maybe one of them will be Einstein. Maybe one of them will be a track star, right? Maybe one of them will be Arnold Schwarzenegger, who knows? But the odds of one of those things happening increase if she has more male partners than if she sticks with the one guy. So the benefits of monogamy, which are shared parental care and territorial resources, are maintained by either having only one mate at a time and serial monogamy, or by concealing extra pair partnerships. Then you can have lifelong pair bonding, and you can have good variety in genetics in your offspring at the same time. And I could make a joke, but I won't. Humans are the only species that has sex in private. Here's another unique thing about humans. No other species goes off into the bedroom and shuts the door when they have sex. Only humans. And why is that? Because it's built-in discretion, right? The propensity to do that helps you be automatically discreet about your extra pair bondings. Now, we have a lot of cultural attributes these days. We have knowledge, we have skill, we have polity, we have status, we have virtue, and we do things like virtue signaling to advertise the fact that we're virtuous. So why do we do all those things? Well, maybe those are extended phenotypic attributes. And if they are, then that's something that's going to be selected for. And it's something you're going to want, right? In a mate, you're going to look for somebody who's knowledgeable and smart and has a good brain, because those are good things for your genetics to be passed on. And if they have skill, that's a good thing. And if they know how to deal with other people, that's a good thing, and so on. So gaining and displaying these attributes can be viewed as a way of making yourself mate-worthy. And if you have those attributes and you display them, and you meet somebody who is looking for those attributes and finds them attractive, that's going to be a successful combination for having better viability in current and future generations of your offspring, and passing on your genes, and passing on both the attraction and the attractiveness. So let's see if that's been going on. Well, 50,000 years ago, we got language. And at that time, people were making objects like this. So these are tools. These are stone tools. So this is Neolithic. And you can see these stone tools, they had a purpose. They had a function. So if you're somebody who can make one of these things, it's got a very sharp edge. It can be used for taking meat off a bone. It can be made for cutting a skin. It can be used as a spearhead. It can be used for getting food and defending yourself. So this is a very valuable artifact to own. And imagine having the ability and the skill to make that thing. Okay, so you're a Cro-Magnon and you're sitting down and you're chipping away at a piece of rock, and you can make this thing. And somebody of the opposite sex walks by and looks at it and says, wow, would you look at that? That's something valuable. That's something utilitarian. And by God, it has good symmetry. And somehow that gets a reaction out of me. That's art. Now, the person that's making that stuff suddenly becomes very valuable too. And if you can mate with that person, your offspring will get that skill. And having them have that skill is something that's going to make them more viable in terms of current and future offspring and passing on their genetics. About 25,000 years ago, this was carved out of a piece of ivory. And again, we've got the big round symmetrical breasts, we've got the big round symmetrical butt, but this is a piece of modern art too. This is better than the art that's been produced by Henry Moore. And he was pretty famous for his sculpture. This is good stuff. 25,000 years ago. Now imagine if you were the person who made this. Imagine how sexy that would make you. What if you could make a spearhead that was really good at pulling a fish out of the water? That would make you an extremely valuable mate as well, right? What if you could make a needle and you could sew? Or you could make something that was like a needle, but it was bigger, and you could make nets and you could catch fish with nets. Now you're also very valuable. Was it men or women who made these things? Mostly women. So this was women making themselves selectable as well as men. And look at these things. These were made between 17 and 11,000 years ago. They're beautiful. They're symmetric. They're carved out of bone. They're long. They're sharp. They're very good for what they're designed to do. Somehow they drilled that tiny little hole in the end there, and they don't split when you use them. So this is an amazing piece of art, and it's also functional, and it makes the maker of this extremely valuable as a mate. And then we get to 11,000 years ago, and we've got to the point where we're making things very symmetrical, and we're polishing them and making them very beautiful. And these particular artifacts were amongst a collection of artifacts that were found by archaeologists in groups. So you might find 50 of them in a dig, and they're all together, and they've never been used, and they're gorgeous. So why were they made? Well, they might have been made for trade, right? They might have been made for use. They might have been made as training implements. You want to learn how to do this? Come here and I'll show you. Now you make one, right? And pretty soon we got a pile of 50 of these things. But for whatever reason they were made, look at the symmetry. Look at the polish. It's art. And the ability to do something like this would make the maker extremely valuable. So what was the impact of all of this kind of stuff that we've talked about? Well, human males have by far the longest penis in relation to their body size of all the primates. They evolved this because of sperm competition, but it probably became an attractor for females. And there's another benefit that comes along. The exceptional length of the erect human penis is also an adaptation for pair bonding. The long penis makes possible a wide variety of copulatory positions, including face-to-face. And that promotes social bonding during sexual intercourse. Let's talk about that a little bit. Some of the neural circuits and the neurochemical substances that have been used to bond mothers and children, such as those involving oxytocin and endogenous opioids, also became involved in mediating bonding between adults. Early male hominids always approach the female from behind, in all primates. Always approach the female from behind. So what is the male looking for? Approaching the female from behind. He's looking for things that are good indicators, like good hair and good buttocks and so on. And receptivity at that time might have included her buttocks being red and saying, yes, I'm ready. But that's a problem because that doesn't really promote bonding. Now, dopamine generation in modern humans is magnified by eye contact with somebody they consider attractive. And there was a study done in 1989 that says simple eye contact can make a person fall in love with you. And the study was two opposite sex strangers were asked to gaze into each other's eyes for 2 minutes. And in some cases, it produced passionate feelings just by looking in their eyes. They're not talking. They're obviously attractive at the beginning, but they look into each other's eyes and they're falling in love. Another thing that happened is, the breasts of females evolved over time. We'll talk about that more later, along with a gradual tilting of the pelvis. And that brought the vagina from the back, like in the chimpanzee all the way on the left, to the upright position, and it moved it towards the front. Okay, so the combination of those things made it possible to have face-to-face sex. And it marked a departure from the position that all the other apes use. Darwin and Desmond Morris also proposed this theory and suggested that breasts are substitutes for the round red buttocks of our female ape ancestors. So we want to stop having sex approaching from the rear, and we want to start approaching from the front. And that should be promoted because that would promote pair bonding, because now we can look in each other's eyes when we have our orgasm and promote all this oxytocin. And that's a really strong bonding mechanism. So what do? You take the buttocks and you move them to the front. And now you want to have sex from the front. So that explains a lot of our anatomy today. Now we know why we have the long penis. We have the glands at the end. Female have large permanent breasts because they look like buttocks. And they have a vagina that's oriented for face-to-face sex. Face-to-face sex We see, here's a sculpture from 11,000 years ago. This is the oldest illustration of that we have. And clitoral orgasm is easier to achieve than vaginal. And all the erogenous zones, with few exceptions, are on the front of the body, not on the back. So again, all of that stuff promotes face-to-face sex, and it gets passed on generation to generation, and it increases. The long human penis may also increase the probability of female orgasm. So there's another thing that promotes it through generations. This heightens the female's readiness for engaging in sexual activity and strengthens the bond with her mate. So let's look at a timeline now that we've gone through all of this. About 6 million years ago, we have pro-Homo sapiens hominids. They're in small tribes, 50 individuals, high dimorphism. They're probably a tournament species. About 170,000 years ago, we're Homo sapiens now. We have a common ancestor, mitochondrial Eve is her name. We're still in small tribes, about 50 individuals. We're hunter-gatherers, we're nomadic. We're probably polygynous at this time. There's sperm competition. We've seen signs of that. Attractivity at this point is probably based solely on anatomy and looking for things like, you know, does she have good hair? Proceptivity is secondary sexual characteristics and pheromones, and receptivity are indicators of biological readiness. Then 50,000 years ago, we get speech. It's the beginning of self-domestication. We're still in small tribes, but they're getting bigger. There's about 150 individuals now in a tribe. And this is enabled by speech, right? Because if you have the ability to communicate, say, a hunting procedure or a hunting strategy, you know, like you guys go over there, we're going to go over here, we're going to drive that animal off the cliff. Then you three guys, you'd be waiting at the bottom of the cliff, you get it with the spears, right? And you can do that. You can support a tribe of 150 individuals, still hunter-gatherers, still nomadic. This is also, according to anthropologists, the great leap forward. That's what they call this, because not only did we get speech, this is when we started putting on clothing. This is when we started doing ritual burials. And we have now a spoken culture, which is very powerful. And this leads to monogamy, but we still have a matriarchy, which is strongly implied by the fact that self-domestication is happening. So the women are involved in getting rid of the reactive aggressive males. There's also increased selection by women based on spoken genealogy, because the women are going to sit around in a circle while they're making their fish hooks and their spearheads and so on. And they're going to be talking about the males, and they're going to be talking about the male's parents, and they're going to be talking about their children, and they're going to be saying to each other, well, you know, Ruthie's getting to be the right age to have a mate. Who would be a good candidate? Well, I don't know. Bob's a pretty good candidate, but you know, Bob's parents fight terribly. I don't want her married to their offspring because he might be a fighter. You know, we don't want that for my daughter. Well, what about George? Well, he's a pretty smart guy. You should see the spearheads he makes. They're really beautiful, right? So they're having these kinds of conversations, and that's going to change the way people are selecting for mates. They're going to start looking for things like proactive aggression. That's something they don't want. They want protection from proactively aggressive males. They want people with skills as well as intelligence and temperament and the indicators of those things. And they're looking for people with low reactive aggression and humor and the ability to have a good time. Also at this time, selection by men is going to change. They're going to start looking for skill sets and so on. But it's the females who are really driving this bus about who do my children get to mate with. Then about 30,000 years ago, we're at the level where we're self-domesticated at this point. We have lowered physical dimorphism. It's down to 15% difference. And we invent something totally new and only among humans, romance. 11,000 years ago, another brain mutation gives us the ability to communicate with symbols. So we can write now. We can support larger groups. we figured out that if we stay in one place, we can grow crops and raise animals in pens, and we don't have to be nomads anymore. So we became agrarian. And when you become agrarian, now you can support a population of 1,000 people in one space. Now, because we also have the ability to write things down, we can write things down about genealogy. There's a whole section in the Bible about who begat who. So we know that took place. And this genealogy now enables us to do things that are really deep, like, well, did he have insanity in his family 5 generations ago? You know, that's something we'll look for now. We also became conscious, because we're agrarians, of selective breeding. We started selectively breeding plants and selectively breeding animals, and we started domesticating animals. So we understand that by breeding out the aggressive males, you end up with domesticated animals, and they show the domestication syndrome. And now the men start looking at this history of genealogy and knowing about selective breeding and understanding that which male has which offspring with which female becomes really important. So they come up with the question of, how do we guarantee we know who the father is, right? So they make up a bunch of religious rules, which in many cases, I mean, 2 of the 10 commandments are about who is the father. And we're definitely into a monogamy period now, because the men are in control. They want to know who the father is. So monogamy is the rule. Okay, whether it's natural or not is totally immaterial, because they're going to enforce this rule. Now, is the monogamy serial? Well, it is on the part of the men, because all they have to say is, I divorced thee 3 times, and they're divorced. And he can go off and find another female, or 2, even in some cases, or 3 or 4. But the female's screwed. Okay, in a social context, she's out of the loop. But hidden trysts obviously are taking place too. Otherwise, why would one of the 10 commandments be, don't covet your neighbor's wife? So hidden trysts are probably taking place. So again, who is the father becomes really, really important. Selection by women, if they're allowed to select at all, is going to be based on things now like heredity and wealth and class, because we got cities. Cities have mayors, cities have armies, cities have police, right? So what class are you in, and can you marry up? That becomes really important. Social stature becomes really important. And because we're reading and we're writing and we're speaking and we're telling stories, imagination, and romance, imagination becomes really important as a selector. With men, same kind of thing. They're looking for, does her family have money? Does she have a good dowry? Is her germline, they wouldn't use those words, but does it show indicators of good sanity and good health, and so on? Is she a fun person to be with? All of those things. So if you look at the timeline, you can see now we went from high dimorphic to lower dimorphic. We went from at least polygyny to serial monogamy with hidden trysts. We went from just mating as a selector to pairing, to genealogy as something involved in sexual selection, to socioeconomics as something involved in sexual selection, to romanticism. And we went from social dominance, which was more matriarchy than patriarchy, but because of religious rules, now we live in a patriarchal society, and we're starting to get out of it, but not fast enough. But we've made quite a journey. We've gone from a place where males are competing, if we were high dimorphic, that's what was going on, to mutual selection, low physical dimorphism, females sharing power, conflicts resolved peacefully because we're domesticated now, and monogamy, just like the marmosets. But we are unique. We are the only species where the females have large permanent breasts. We are the only species where males are attracted to rounded female buttocks and plump breasts. We're the only species with that long penis with the glands at the end. We're the only species that take into account genealogy and breeding as sexual attractors. We're the only species that has religion mucking the whole thing up. We're the only species that has sex in private, and we're the only species that has romance. So happy Valentine's Day. Thank you. So, any comments, questions? Eric will bring you the talking stick.
Well, I don't think we've lost it yet, but I actually believe our genes, male genes programmed to want to spread their sperm, and female genes programmed us to want to nest and push 7,000 things out of our vagina. And how would you want to do that if it wasn't genetically programmed?
Okay, that's just reinforcement. I mean, our behavior, as hard to explain as it can be, it's based primarily on our genetics. I mean, in Star Trek, there is the prime directive, right? Don't mess up other civilizations. But the prime directive for genetics is keep those genetics going on into the future, right? So all of our behavior, that's the prime directive. Have sex, procreate, and improve over time, so you can survive. And that's what drives much of what we do.
I have a question. I'm just curious about homosexuality and how that fits into this picture. Do you think that homosexuality is possibly nature's way of limiting population?
Well, there are some I'm sorry, I got to repeat the question. The question was, what about homosexuality? Is that a way of limiting the population? Homosexuality actually increases in densely populated areas. Okay, so that may have something to do with it. I really don't know. But there are over 300 species other than humans that practice homosexual behaviors. So it's not, I mean, there's a whole bunch of people in this world that say homosexuality is an aberration, but clearly it's not. It's actually natural if 300 species are doing it. But what's the purpose of it? That's hard to nail down. But again, yeah, there is an indicator that the denser the population, the higher the incidence of homosexuality.
I think under the phenotypes had those characteristics listed. Take somebody like Tweety who came along and changed the dynamics of beauty. Now that's directly against the big hips and big breasts or anything like that, but it worked. It seemed to work. It got manipulated. Or in black society, even whiter is considered to be more beautiful. So I don't know. I didn't answer that.
The perfect woman has changed over time. If you go back to the 60s and you look at the females in a Playboy magazine, you wouldn't find them that attractive because they don't have athletic bodies at all. They're very soft and mushy looking kinds of people. Really. And yeah, and overweight by our standards currently. And that's not that long ago. And if you go back to the Renaissance, most of the attractive women in Renaissance paintings have a belly about them, and the belly is an indicator of fecundity, right? There's a woman that can bear children. So that was a valuable thing to look for. So it does shift. Now, one thing I'd say about Twiggy is she looked like she was about 12, right? And men are attracted to younger women. And any attraction is subject to something called the peak shift effect. And what that is like the peacock thing, right? If a female peacock is looking for a male, she's looking for the big feather display. And if she sees 3 or 4 males walking by and they all have this display, but one of them is bigger, she's going to go for the bigger one, right? Because that's the trigger. That's her hot button. And if males are attracted to younger females, Twiggy pushed their button a little bit harder, but I think Twiggy was, as much a female phenomenon as a male phenomenon. I don't know. We could talk about that at length.
Thank you. Thinking about, like when a woman is, ovulating, so things change, like what she's attracted to, and the man wants, sense that. What about a woman who is on pill, or something that changes that?
Okay, that's a great question. What about when a woman is on the pill? What effect is that going to have? Well, the way the pill works is the chemicals in the pill are the chemicals that indicate to her body that she's pregnant. Okay, and that stops her ability to ovulate. But what is the effect of her thinking, or her body reacting as though it's pregnant? Her choices are going to be based on her being pregnant. So females who are pregnant tend to select for good, nurturing parents. So they select for men that are more feminine and would be a good father. Okay, and one of the things that's happening today in society is a woman on the pill goes out, meets a guy. He looks like he's going to be a good father. He looks more feminine. He's nicer. He's a real good guy. And they get married, and she gets off the pill. And as soon as she gets off the pill, she looks at this guy and says, "Why did I marry him?" But she is married to him. So they have offspring, and the offspring, because of what happened, are going to tend to be more feminine and more caring and so on. So if we're evolving today based on recognition of sexual attractors, things are getting tilted because of the pill, right? And we're going to start evolving towards a race then, as long as we keep doing this, of males that are more feminized and are better parenting skills. Anybody else? Question, comment? Chris?
I'll comment, in Amazon, there are these fish called the flatfish, and there's one kind of female, there's three kinds of males. There's the strong ones, there's the mimic ones, and there are the sweets. So the female fish want to marry the big strong ones, but when all the big strong ones have babies and all the big strongs around, the ones that look like mimics, that look like females, they infiltrate the school of fish, and they're able to mate more with the females. And so then there are more mimics in the group. And so because there are more mimics in the group, the sneaks, the smaller ones, they will sneak in with the females. And then when there are more sneaks in the group, so the school, then it's strong. The ones that are stronger, they're able to sneak in. So there's this whole rhythm of the little islands of fish, catfish, the little ones that do rainbows. They have this cycle of different males that they're attracted to.
Sexual selection among fish. Here you go.
I'd like to know what you think the status of pheromones in humans is, because I thought people have been looking for pheromones for a long time and haven't found any. But you're talking about pheromones in humans.
Well, they actually do exist. I'll give you an example of how we know this. In the body, you have receptors on all your cells for different things. And one set of those receptors is unique to you. So if you emit pheromones that attach to those receptors, that's you attaching to yourself. If you have a brother, his receptors are going to be similar to yours. And because they're similar to yours, by way of the pheromones, he recognizes you, his body recognizes your body as being a close relative. So the propensity to mate with a close relative is dependent on the fact that those pheromones are so similar to your receptors. But the further they get away from you, the more different those receptors are, and the more likely then you are to mate. So one of the things that happens in all human societies and many, many animal societies is that you don't mate with your brother, you don't mate with your sister, you don't mate with your first cousin. But how does a lion know? It's because of those pheromones. And if there's no evidence of it, I don't know. I haven't read any studies about that, but I trust you.
That may not necessarily be true to pheromones, but maybe some other chemical in here.
Well, I don't know.
So my
Okay.
question is, what are the needs of these pheromones?
Mhm.
And what are the dynamics of protection? And they're finding an effect, but is that necessarily pheromones? It's a
Okay.
number of needs, so maybe we still don't know about whether or not humans have sexual pheromones.
Okay. This is a deep conversation, and I think this is probably another presentation. And if you want to give that presentation, I vote. How many people wanted to give that presentation on pheromones and their effects?
About change in terms of choices and parameters. You look at see, that don't care about us. I just want that sex.
Well, just wanting to have sex is also something that's driven by genetics. Because if you didn't want to have sex, you wouldn't have sex, and your genes wouldn't get passed on to another generation, and that would be the end of people who don't want sex, right? So people that don't want sex, pretty rare. Now, do you want to have sex and don't care about procreating? Your genes don't give a poop. Okay, your genes. If you want to have sex but not procreate, your genes don't recognize that as a factor. Your genes have to reproduce to get to the next generation. And if you do something to stop that from happening, they won't get to the next generation and you'll die out. Your gene line will die out. That's the way evolution works. If something works, it goes on into the future. If it doesn't work, it disappears. Hookers don't, because they're getting paid. A male with a female hooker. You mean what does the male care?
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't.
Well, none of this is at a conscious, rational level, really, right? Your propensity to do something driven by your genes. Okay, you want to have sex because your genes say have sex, procreate, have sex, procreate. So you go to a hooker. And as far as your impulses that are driven by your DNA and your genes, you're fulfilling them, right? And at a conscious level, you're not saying, well, I'm having sex, but I won't be procreating. That doesn't even enter the equation, except at a rational level where you're saying to yourself at a rational level, yeah, I'm wearing a condom, I'm not going to procreate. But you're still fulfilling the genetic drive to at least go through the motions and gather the rewards as you may.
I think one of the things you said in your lecture about men being always ready for sex has something to do with that compared to women. And I think that you can see what you think about this. That's why we have so many porn sites for men. And that's why we have brothels for men and we don't for women. There's a big difference, and that's the source of a lot of fiction in today's society.
Right. So to repeat, the propensity for men to have sex over and over again and always be ready to have sex. Let's talk about that a little bit. In chimpanzees and bonobos, the penis has a piece of cartilage in it. And a bonobos and a chimpanzee always have an erection, always have an erection. They're not only ready for sex because they want to, they're ready for sex whether they want to or not, right? So yeah, there is, and it's easy, don't forget, economically to produce sperm where it's much more difficult to produce and maintain an egg and carry out that whole process. So yeah, it's natural for men to be the prime driver in that sexual, having intercourse on a regular and ongoing basis. So yeah, to fulfill that need, which is a very strong driver in men, yeah, we have brothels for men, which nowadays can include men and women. And we have a lot of our strange behaviors are based on that, so porn sites. But one thing to note about porn sites, they do studies on who visits their sites, and they report that 40% of their visitors are women. Imagine that. Maybe curiosity, but 40%. Well, curiosity. Yes.
This is very vague, but I heard a podcast this morning talking about how dating site revenue people is very, very down. And people are looking now for more, I don't know, for maybe in-person stuff. And we know that marriage, wait, and in this country, and as children, which of course is due to economics, million, anyways, they.
Yeah. Right. Well, okay. So dating sites are losing users for a couple of reasons. One is dating sites don't really work very well. The people you meet on dating sites tend not to be desirable. So if you're out there looking for actual love on a dating site, the odds are you're not going to find it. You might find a lot of those Machiavellian type men. And again, those guys are good for one night stands, but after a couple of that, you're done with that. So yeah, dating sites they're not working out because they're not designed to match our genetic drives. I forget where you were going and I forgot where I was going. Yeah.
You mentioned romance.
Yeah.
Which to me seems like a purely intellectual endeavor. How is that tying into, the response to the genes and the procreate?
Well, again, it goes back to what works, right? If 50,000 years ago, you get the ability to speak and you see a female that you find desirable, and you go over to her and you say something that triggers a response in her, and then you get to mate with her. Now, it doesn't matter what you said or how you said it, right? But whatever it was, it worked, right? So her attractiveness to that phraseology, whatever it was, is something that she's going to pass on to her offspring. And your ability to say that phrase, whatever it was, gets passed on to your offspring. So that's something that worked and it got passed on. So let's give it a name. Chatting up a female. Okay, you could call it that. Or smooth talker. Or suppose you can even make it rhyme. Oh my God. Now that shows that you have intellect, right? You know a lot of words and you can put them together in a very clever way. That shows intelligence, right? And selecting for intelligence, well, that's going to get passed on. And being attracted to intelligence, that's going to be passed on. So whatever it is, be it foolish or be it romance or whatever you want to call it, if it works, it survives, gets passed on to future generations, right? If it didn't work, if she said, what are you, some kind of fool? Then that would be the end of that. And then we wouldn't have romance. So, it's something we invented. It works. It gets passed on. And hey, happy Valentine's Day. Tell me it doesn't work. Tell me Robert Burns wasn't the most popular guy in Scotland.
Why do men have nipples?
Why do men have nipples? Because we're animals. Male dogs have nipples. Why do they? It's because, the genes that design and build your body have nipples in the design. You don't need them, but there they are. It doesn't prevent you from reproducing, So there's no reason for them to go away. You know, there's no reason for them to be deselected
Why are they there in the first place?
because you're an animal. You know, all animals start out with them, and if there's no reason to deselect them, they go on.
So that's what he's there.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Tracy, I have to repeat this. Tracy says that during the developmental phase, they're there before your sex is even selected. And there's no reason to deselect them out, so they stay. Okay, I like that.
There's also some of the genetic programming being common rather than having it be
Oh, yeah.
specific to just one chromosome.
Genetic efficiency, yes.
Why are 70% of American males circumcised, where in Europe, it's the opposite? 70% of the males are left intact.
We have more Jewish doctors. That's a society thing. That's a sociological thing. I think it goes back to World War II. They actually inspected men for the word is smegma, but I don't want to get into what that is. But they would inspect the soldiers for smegma, which meant they weren't cleaning themselves appropriately. So they started doing that on a regular and ongoing basis, just for health reasons, and it's something that's stuck.
I was a nurse in World War II, a young nurse, and it was health reasons.
It was health reasons. Okay, Doris, thank you for telling me. Right. Doris was a nurse during World War II. Yeah. This is going to be a long one. What time is it?
I'm going to challenge your, some of the assertions that you made that, this.
Okay, I think we're done here.
No. It was a matriarchal before it became patriarchal. My sense of it was that the way I thought about it was that until very recently, a lot of those hunter-gatherer tribes raided each other. The one next door. And one of the prizes that were taken away from the losers were the women and maybe even the children. And that led to some genetic diversity, but they were some of the spoils of the competition. I think that's how it was working back then, up until very recently.
Okay, the premise here is because of raids tribe to tribe, which resulted in the women being raped and taken away, that would indicate that societies were not matriarchal. But I don't see that as evidence of sociologically them not being matriarchal.
There's a great book that I recommend called The Horse, the Wheel, and Language by David Anthony. One of the things that he talks about in that book is that rating was somewhat self-limiting in earlier societies because if you rated their neighbors, they knew who you were and they'd come back. There was some consequences to that. And also in earlier societies, they had relatively limited goods that you would be able to rate, but that the domestication of the horse and cattle was particularly the horse, was very important to patriarchy because it made the ability to gather large resources in the forms of livestock and cattle much easier than horses. And the ability to raise faraway groups that would not even know who you were and would never be able to trace you back. So you go out 100 miles, raise some community that don't know who you are, take their cattle, maybe their women, and then you had to defend your big outlet, your big groups of cattle that you spent lots of time raising. And that was a big driver for wealth inequalities, stratification of societies and also paper. And so before that development, there was probably less of a patriarchal side. It was really fascinating. Um, um, Now, we are getting a little long in time. Oh, yes, by
Desmond Morris.
Desmond Morris.
Have it, man.
Uh, Any other
So,
questions?
Eric, could you repeat the name of that book you mentioned?
Oh, it's called The Horse, the Wheel, and
The Horse, the Wheel and Language, and the author was?
David Anthony.
David Anthony.
David W. Anthony.
Okay, and another book was mentioned, The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris. I'm just getting that into the recording.
Sure, yep. Yeah, the other thing about that Horse, the Wheel, and Language book is, it, talks about the ancestor population of the Indo-European languages. Very, very interesting book. Very good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna shut this down now, okay?